What looked at first like a solidly promising midterm season for the GOP may be starting to crack. Between a federal abortion ban proposed by South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, exposing big divides in his party, and closer to home, Trump-backed candidates winning primaries, but polling far behind in the general, from Jeff Deal going for governor here in Massachusetts to winners in yesterday's primaries, Caroline Leavitt and Don Bolduc going for U.S. House and Senate seats, respectively, in New Hampshire. Many Republicans are growing increasingly concerned about their party's ability to flip seats and gain real ground in elected office. Others, though, are celebrating. Joined by Jim Rappaport, former chair of the Massachusetts Republican Party, and Jennifer Horn, who is not standing in front of a screen, by the way, former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party and one of the founders of the anti-Trump PAC, the Lincoln Project. Jennifer, I'm jealous, and Jim, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for having us.
Jim, let me start with you. Donald Trump is clearly dominating. His candidates are dominating Republican primaries. Here in Massachusetts, his endorsed candidate, Jeff Deal, is the nominee. Is that the right choice for the GOP, Jeff Deal, Jim?
Well, I definitely think Jeff Deal is because he's been involved in Massachusetts for a long time. He led the fight against the Democrats' gas tax.
He did.
He led the fight to put the illegal immigrant licensure bill recall on the ballot. So he's been involved in much more than that, and he backed Trump in 2016 because he felt you needed a disruptor. And I think Jeff is will be a good candidate, and the campaign is going to be a lot closer than people will think it will be at the end.
You know, Jim, if I may, Jim, Jeff was kind enough to come on the radio with Marge and me the day after he won the primary. And I had to ask him 11 times, I counted it a minute ago, whether Joe Biden was the legitimate president of the United States before he finally said yes. Does that trouble you in a Republican candidate?
No, I mean, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. He's a terrible president, but
that wasn't my question for him. I said, is he the legitimate president?
But it is relevant. But, you know, it's the same question of whether the election was a fair in many instances. You look at there are lots of instances to point out where, in fact, it was incredibly rigged. Whether it was the 120 intelligence people who claimed that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation when in fact it was his. And by the way,
yeah, but by the way, Jim, if I may interrupt you, we're not debating the legitimacy. I'm saying the candidate for governor in Massachusetts ultimately said Biden's the legitimate president, but only after having been asked 11 times. Let me go to Jennifer for a second. Jennifer, okay. I know you're not a Trump fan. I think that's pretty clear. I think you're a former Republican too. Let me show you a poll done very recently in this Massachusetts governor's race, which I find pretty amazing. It's an Emerson WHDH poll, September 7th and 8th. Maura Healey is leading Jeff Deal by only 18 points. By the way, Trump lost here to Biden by 33. And Jeff Deal is leading amongst independents or unenrolled voters, which is, as I'm sure you know, the largest, quote, party, the largest contingent in Massachusetts. What does that say to you?
It's incredibly disturbing. I have to tell you, it's equally disturbing and disappointing to hear somebody, as rational and reasonable as Jim continuing to try to protect this, this lie, this conspiracy theory. The best example we have of what you just showed, Jim, up here in New Hampshire is the first congressional district race, where it's a seat where the Democrat incumbent is considered the most vulnerable in the country. Mm-hmm. But it's close enough in voter registration that in order for a Republican to win it, that Republican has to win some Democrats and some independents. And they just nominated the most irrational candidate possibly who has run this year across the country, who also embraces this idea that the election was unfair or rigged or somehow, a big scam in some way. A former Donald Trump employee.
Well, you met her name is Caroline Leavitt. She's running against Chris Pappas, the Democrat. Let's hear what she had to say. This is a debate of 5 Republicans, WMUR, just last week. She was trying to separate herself from the other Trump-supporting Republican, saying, well, you'll hear what she had to say. Here it is.
I consistently continue to be the only candidate in this race who says that I believe the 2020 election was undoubtedly stolen from President Trump.
You know, and Jim Rappaport, you add to that, this guy, Don Bolduc, if I may, is the nominee as of last night to run against Maggie Hassan. Some people think the most vulnerable Democrat in the Senate. Also in New Hampshire.
I think Nevada's more.
Well,
more
it's up there. Let me just tell you a couple things. I made a couple notes about him. He's also an election was stolen kind of guy. He wants the 17th Amendment, I think it is, repealed, which allows for the direct election of senators. The FBI eliminated and the Education Department. And he called the governor of New Hampshire, Sununu, a Chinese communist sympathizer. Same question I ask you here. Is that a good candidate for the GOP? For the United States Senate in New Hampshire?
Look at both parties have problematic candidates. You can go to Fetterman in Pennsylvania.
No, but I'm asking you about Bolduc.
I'm telling you, I'm voting for Rubio in Florida. So, and my guy will definitely win. So, but is he the perfect candidate? There are very few perfect candidates. I didn't have a dog in that hunt. Do I think Morse probably be a better candidate? I think there's an opportunity for any Republican to win this year because of how bad Joe Biden has been.
You know, one of the things that
Jim, let me just real quick.
Sure.
Jim knows the answer to that question. He's a terrible candidate. Bolduc is a terrible candidate for the Republican Party.
And what did you do to help Morse get elected? What did you do to help Morse get elected?
Jim, I don't live in that state anymore. I don't have, to your point, I don't have a dog in that hunt either. But it doesn't take anything other than a rational person to look at Don Bolduc and realize that unless you believe that Donald Trump is what's best for the Republican Party, that Trumpism, that Trump leadership is what's best for the Republican Party, then you can't possibly believe that Don Bolduc is a good candidate any more than Caroline Leavitt is.
First of all, you are conflating Donald Trump and his behavior with the issues that he successfully pushed over the 4 years when he was president. And which is one of the problems with people like you in the Lincoln Project, is that your animus for him ignored totally what in fact he did, like the Abraham Accords, which they're now celebrating, which, by the way, Joe Biden has managed to totally screw up.
Jim, if I may,
thank you so much for creating that opening for me.
Go ahead.
That the idea that somehow, as someone who opposes Donald Trump does so out of animus for an individual, out of some sort of personal hatred. I don't have a personal relationship with Donald Trump, but I love the Constitution. I love the vision that our founding fathers had for America. I love the idea of democracy and freedom for all people around the world. And that is what Donald Trump has
including in
Afghanistan. I have to stop you just for a second. Jennifer, I want to get back. Jennifer, if I may. Jim,
17 million women
hold it for a second.
Required to wear burqas.
Jim, if I may. Jennifer, part of the problem, it seems to me, from on your perspective, is Governor Sununu, again called a Chinese communist sympathizer by the Senate nominee.
Right.
And Sununu criticized that nominee. He endorsed Morse, who came in second.
And he wrote editorials.
If I may, Governor Sununu said, Jennifer, I'll support the candidate, the nominee, whoever it is. So he describes this guy as totally unfit to serve, sort of like Mitch McConnell did on the Senate floor after January 6th about Donald Trump. When Mitch McConnell was asked who he'd vote for if Trump was the nominee in 2024, he said Donald Trump. And Chris Sununu said, I'll vote for Don Bolduc if he's our nominee. That's the problem, is it not?
That is as much the problem as the candidate themselves is. Absolutely. That's why I'm no longer a registered Republican, not because of the behavior of Donald Trump as president, but because of the behavior of Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership in Congress after he lost the election on January 6th and all the days leading up to that. Until there are Republican candidates.
I mean, the fact that you have
Jim, let her finish and then I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
Until it is the behavior, it isn't crap, Jim. The behavior of Republican leadership has lost Republican voters as a result of that. Until we have Republican leaders who will openly reject Donald Trump and the damage he has done, not to our party, but to our country, then I can't vote for those Republican people. Those Republican candidates who will speak up.
What you're talking about is crazy.
I know you won't.
And you know
I
what?
know
The
that you
Republicans
won't
are
miss
winning
my vote,
elections. We were elected
but
the
as
first
you should know, Jim,
Mexican-born
and I'm sure you know,
Okay, I got to hold you
Republican
both for a
in the history
second.
of the
Jim,
country.
Jim, if I may, do you
the
the
idea
convention?
that
No,
you
no,
won't
Jennifer,
miss
Jennifer,
my
Jennifer.
vote is the
Hold it a
most
second. Jim, the conventional wisdom from at least what I consider to be objective people, you may not, is the more extreme the Republican nominee is, the more the Democrats' prospects are enhanced, like Maggie Hassan, like Chris
Yes.
Pappas. You don't agree with that analysis, Jim Rappaport?
I think the election goes beyond that. Because I'm not sure necessarily that moderates per se, just because they're moderate, are going to win. If they run on the wrong issues, if you're running on the outrageous inflation, which came in at 8.3% again yesterday, and you have a president who denies it, when you have a vice president who denies that the border is in fact open and says, no, we have a secure border. Those are issues that are going to overwhelm the concerns that some of Bolduc's positions are
But Jim,
ridiculous.
are they going to overwhelm the concerns when a leading high-profile Republican senator gives a speech yesterday? In fact, let's hear from him. Here's Lindsey Graham from South Carolina.
I think we should have a law at the federal level that would say after 15 weeks, no abortion on demand, except in cases of rape, incest, to save the life of the mother. And that should be where America's at.
So a lot of Republicans who I heard said, my biggest problem with what Lindsey Graham had to say is we were supposed to be talking about all the things Jim Rappaport just said, inflation, those sorts of issues, the border.
Right.
He's changed the discussion. And number two, as I'm sure you and Jennifer know, more than 2/3 of the American people wanted Roe to be put back in place. If Lindsey Graham were to get his way, even places like Massachusetts would lose the protections we have in all likelihood. That's good for the Republican Party?
I do travel around the country a fair amount, and contrary to the CBS reporter who said that 90% of the people talk about abortion, that's not what I'm hearing people talk about. They're talking about gas prices. They're talking about food prices being up 12%. They're talking about what's being taught improperly in our schools. Those are the things that real people care about.
Yeah, but they may, Jim, but real
I don't
people,
think
real
abortion
people
is going to be
saying,
in it.
real people, well, talk to the people in Kansas, I think, might have a different opinion.
But that was a different, that was, first of
Republicans.
all, that was I take a different take on them than you're taking on it.
What is
and
it?
what essentially they said was, one is that as in Massachusetts, when we have won every single anti-tax ballot question, except for the one where they went in 1992, where they went too far.
It was actually 1990. I led that campaign.
1990,
Thank you,
excuse
Jim.
me.
Very
Yes,
kind to you. I
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
1990. I was
Thank you. It's okay.
on the ballot that year.
It's okay.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But, so when you go too far, the voters.
Yeah, but Lindsey, if I may, Lindsey Graham's not gone too far. How about the Republicans in the Senate? 71% of Americans support same-sex marriage. There are only 3 Republicans who are willing to vote to codify it by federal statute for fear that Justice Thomas's desires are going to become reality. They're running totally in the face of where close to 3/4 of Americans are.
Well, once again, I do have faith in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in the decision made it very clear that the decision only dealt with abortion, did not deal with the others.
That's not what Thomas said. Jennifer, if
know
I may,
Thomas
I
said
don't
it, but
even
it was
care
a-
what
it
your
was a
position is on
decision
choice.
of one.
I don't even
There's
care
9.
Jennifer, I don't even care what your position is on choice. What do you make of Lindsey Graham's comments as a former Republican thinking about Republican prospects come this November and the following,
Well,
2 Novembers down?
if you want to look at this strictly from the perspective of how do you win an election in November of 2022, Lindsey Graham's incredibly damaging. Jim is embracing the traditional wisdom that midterm elections are about the incumbent president. Donald Trump isn't allowing this election to be about Joe Biden and what he has or hasn't accomplished. Donald Trump and his endorsed candidates across the country continue to make this about the most extreme, most damaging voices in our party.
I have one last
It's not your
question.
party anymore. You said that.
Well, that's actually the question I want to end with for both of you, which you can separate, your feelings
Jim,
about Trump
you'd
from.
win more
No.
races,
If I
Jim,
may.
if you were a little less
If I may.
silly and adolescent about the way you come at these issues.
Okay, if I may.
I'm just repeating what you said.
If I may, if Trump doesn't run in 2024, does Trumpism survive Donald Trump? And what I mean by that, 70% of the people who support him in the Republican Party agree with him that the election was stolen. If a guy like DeSantis in the state you're talking to me from in Florida is the nominee instead, does that part of the anti-democratic, small d, pro-insurrectionist wing of the Republican Party survive without Trump? Jim, you first, quickly, if you can.
One is that's not what Trumpism was about. Trumpism was about putting America first. It was about
No, but I'm talking about that aspect of Donald Trump.
I think that, you know, and again, as time goes on, it's basically inconsequential. I mean, it really, it's
What,
the
his
race is
assault on
over.
democracy is inconsequential?
It's not an assault on democracy for people to have an
Saying
opinion.
that an election was stolen, that no credible person believes in.
Excuse me, how many Democrats in 2017 said that the election was stolen from Hillary
I
Clinton?
don't do
It was at
whataboutism
least
on the
as high.
show. That's Fox News that does whataboutism.
Well, it's not.
Jennifer, does Trumpism, the portions that I'm describing, the attacks on
Right.
democracy, the January 6th nightmare, does that survive Donald Trump? A lot of people believe he is so ingrained it in his
Right.
core constituents that it doesn't even need him anymore. What do you think, quickly, if you can?
Okay, I think it absolutely survives. And as long as the Republican Party nominates candidates like Caroline Leavitt and Don Bolduc, they're telling us today, they're telling us with the results of the primaries across the country that the party embraces it and is trying to preserve it.
Jennifer
I would
Horn,
disagree. Most of them are not that way. Most candidates who've been elected believe that the election is over, 2020 is over. That will not
Jim,
survive.
if you're
It doesn't survive
willing to
today.
denounce, so Jim, if you will denounce what our host just described yourself personally right now, that if you can publicly denounce Donald Trump and that part of him, I would believe that there is
I've said that
possibility
there are
in
lots
the future.
I have been on your show,
Quickly, please,
in many
quickly.
instances, denounced many actions and that Trump has taken, many of the behaviors and statements he made. What I did, and I was never a
Quickly.
Trump apologist. I was actually a John Kasich supporter initially. So I am not.
So you
We
wouldn't
gotta
vote
go.
for Don Bolduc or Caroline Leavitt? Is that what you'd want us to understand clearly? You wouldn't vote for
It
those two
depends
people?
what the rest of their range of issues
Jim
are.
Rappaport, Jennifer Horn,
Okay.
good to see you both as always. Thanks so much. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank
I
you.
actually mean that. Be well. Take care.
Thank you.
I know.